Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm John Kennedy.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And I'm Peter Walsh.
And it is the 6th Sunday of Easter already. Wow. And we are choosing actually maybe the less obvious choice for the gospel today. The lectionary, the Revised Common Lectionary, gives us two options for the gospel for the 6th Sunday of Easter this year in year C. And we have chosen the John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9 passage. And, I think most of us would like to spend more time by the pool than we get to, but the 38 years that the guy in this passage has been laying by the pool might be a bit much. We'll see. Let's hear it. This is John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. After Jesus healed the son of the official in Capernaum, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool, called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was a Sabbath. So very interesting progression of Easter Gospels for us this year, especially as we have chosen this one, because we go from 2 Sundays ago, Good Shepherd, which is the conclusion of this section of John's Gospel that's dealing with Hebrew or Old Testament feasts and Jesus's sort of fulfillment or echoing them in some way. And now 2 weeks later, we're going back to the beginning of this. This is the first time that John sets up a Jewish festival and has Jesus do or say something that kind of sheds new light on its meaning. And this is also Jesus' second healing miracle in John's Gospel. So, so a few interesting threads here.
Yeah, it's interesting because he goes up to Jerusalem, and there's a little hiccup in the text because in chapter 6 he's back in Galilee, and there's no transition back there. So sometimes John just plays fast and loose with the geography. And also in the text there's a verse missing. I'm sure you guys picked up on that, but verse 4 has been dropped out. I brought the Bible because even if in here, if people open up their Bibles, it goes from verse 3 to verse 5, and it skips verse 4, which says there lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. And the verse would say, waiting for the stirring of the water. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well from whatever disease that person had. And then it picks up again. One man was there who was ill for 38 years. So I didn't have time to get to the bottom of why that is, but it's interesting, and it's a strange verse to leave out because it sort of explains why he was waiting, when the water stirred up, no one's there to put him in it. So.
Yeah, I think the reason is the oldest copy of the scriptures that they have, that verse is not in it. But then in the ones that follow, it is in it, and so they do this.
They go back to the ancient.
Yeah, and they go back to what they can get as the ground, and this gets put into the scribe. And notice how they always say these editions are done by a scribe writing notes in the side,
right?
And then later another scribe says, "This dude's got a good idea. Sorry that it's a man here," and then inserts it into the text. That's the basic idea here, and so it is interesting that all the commentaries talk about this, because if you take that verse out, it's a little bit harder to make sense
absolutely
out of what the heck is happening.
Yeah.
Like, and why he'd be waiting by the pool.
Right.
Why are all these people, all these invalids, as the translation calls them, what are they all doing hanging out at the pool?
Yes.
Back to your opening at the station there.
No, it's there's the big hole in the middle of it. And it is not clear at all otherwise.
There's some reference to Cyril of Jerusalem saying that actually the waters would be stirred up from time to time in that pool.
Yeah, right. There could have, I mean, you can
Like a
believe that
wind.
it was an angel doing it, or it could be some sort of underground geological
little-
disturbance that would
right.
stir it up at some regular interval. And then you can imagine that the people living at this time interpreting it in a supernatural way, as people commonly did before, the sort of scientific revolution and so on, and modernity.
Right.
Well, we have all this now. I mean, we have, healing places like Lourdes and things like that.
Right.
And I mean, I've been to the pool Bethesda several times, and it is really cool. I mean, this was hidden. At one point, commentators thought this was a made-up story because they couldn't find it, and then, of course, they found it. And it's very deep. I mean, the pool is very deep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. It's right next to St. Anne's Church, St. Anne being Mary's mother.
Right.
Jesus' grandmother, and you can come down and you can walk down into the bottom of the pool. The pools are very deep. And I remember the first year we had a pilgrimage there, we all went down to the bottom of the pool, and we had somebody with us who was suffering from cancer, and it was incredibly moving as the whole group, 30 people, gathered around this person at the bottom of the pool at Bethesda, as we call it, Bethesda, and laid hands on her in a kind of group thing. But it really is a thing, and it was where the people of their day went to be healed. It was their Lourdes, kind of thing. Very cool.
Yeah. That is very cool.
And Central Park, doesn't Central Park have a pool with an angel over it?
Fountain of Bethesda.
Fountain of Bethesda.
Yeah, and Emma
Yeah.
Stebbins, she based that on this story, but on the verse that's missing.
On the verse that's missing,
Right.
on the scribal footnote.
Yeah, we should really. I want to lobby right now for this verse to be
know.
added back.
Okay,
in.
so
Especially for
Father
Sunday.
John makes his move in biblical
Right.
studies here. I like that.
right for the new Revised Standard Version.
All inclusive.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And I don't mean to suggest that all places of healing are, in the imagination of the people and psychosomatic or whatever. Like I would never say that about Lourdes. But this is just a place and a situation I know far less about. So we have this man lying there for 38 years. It's not really said what exactly is wrong with him, but it seems like he can't move very well. Maybe he can't walk or walk very well. Anyway, he is grouped in by the narrator here as one of the invalids laying around, and Jesus. I mean, there are many of them lying around. It's interesting. Jesus goes to him, and we have to ask ourselves why. What did Jesus see about this man? And he starts off by asking him, "Do you want to be made well?" And I don't know this for sure, but I don't think he says that to anybody else he heals.
No, I don't think so.
In John or in any of the other Gospels. Very interesting way to begin this encounter.
Close when he says, "What can I? What
do you want me to do
What do you want
for
me to
you?"
do
Oh,
for
sure.
you?"
Yes,
So that's
yes.
as close as I think
Yeah.
he gets.
Yeah.
Yes, that is quite close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the question of why does Jesus choose us? So this is all Jesus's initiative. This is divine initiative here. We have a guy who's been there for 38 years, and he doesn't, this guy doesn't come off looking too great.
No.
Right? He's been there, lying there 38 years. He seems to have, one could interpret that he has little desire to be healed, right?
Yes.
He doesn't even get Jesus' name. Later on in the passage, he blames Jesus for why he's carrying his mat around, and then he turns him into the authorities. And so
I think probably inadvertently. He doesn't probably know what he's doing. He wouldn't want to sell out the man who healed him on purpose, I doubt.
It seems to me like he doesn't really
know.
care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
he seems to vacillate. Yeah, he doesn't seem like the most inspiring guy that ever came down the pike here. I mean, this is versus the man born blind, for instance, in chapter 9, who we see seems to make growth in his spiritual journey toward Johannine enlightenment, whereas this guy, if you finish out if you go all the way to verse 18 in this chapter, this guy seems to have sort of vacillate around, doesn't seem too inspiring one way or the other.
Yeah. And these two healings, Jesus finds them. He goes and seeks them out.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the Johannine phrase about saving someone. It's the initiative of Jesus, like you said already.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, very interesting to pair the fact of Jesus's initiative here with what I think is a clear lesson about the importance of our response. And I thought about this, and part of why I chose this passage as the preacher for this day is because I think it really sort of adds or brings out an important and interesting nuance or facet of, let's say, the meaning of Easter and the reality of resurrection in our lives. We start, obviously, the Easter season with the resurrection stories. Jesus comes back from the dead. God raises him. Jesus gives the Spirit to his disciples. He gives forgiveness to his disciples. He is the Good Shepherd, and all this divine initiative stuff. And then in this passage, we have that, but we also have a reminder that, grace is given, but our response matters too. Mm-hmm. And we can be like the man in the story. And like you said, Peter, he is a really interesting parallel to the man born blind later in John chapter 9, who comes to the light through his encounter with Jesus, who receives the grace in a fruitful way. And this man doesn't. And that's a warning, I think, to everybody.
Well, I'm really glad you chose this passage. We didn't choose it last time we did the pod on this day. And it caused me to redouble down and go back and take a look at this anew. And so I learned a lot. But I still don't understand why they chose it for this spot in Easter. I really don't. I feel like we got a whole New Testament full of passages we might chose. I don't know why this one's in here. Mm-hmm. I mean, is it John trying to tell us that Jesus cures people from spiritual paralysis?
Maybe.
Which is, a possible way to think about this, given that John's gospel, we're told about John's gospel, the purpose of the gospel is to lay out signs, and this is one of the signs. This is the third sign. Mm-hmm. And so that we might believe, and that by believing have life in him. So do we have in this example a man who goes through those steps? Does he, he's been the sign. He's the recipient of the sign. Does he believe? Okay, pretty much so. And does he have life in his name? Well, we don't even get that in this pericope, because we're at a place where it gets cut off right at the climax of the story, but we don't get the resolution of the story. And so, again, I'm actually not quite sure what it's doing here in the Easter season, and perhaps somebody of a greater knowledge of all things can tell me why they chose this passage. I don't know.
Well, I think John was getting near it with the idea that Easter has to be moved into. Mm-hmm. Easter in John and the Johannine writings, including the book of Revelation, everything's pointing to the great feast, and the great banquet laid out for everyone, and healing this kind of ingrate. Perhaps, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced he's ungrateful, but just more naive or something. But it's the indiscriminate nature of Jesus to heal and give life. Yeah. And I think that the feast is available to all, and it's up to us to move into it and come to the table and, let go of our lameness and walk, So I like this idea of getting up and walking, and the Sabbath day, the eighth day, and in John, if we go back to the prologue, we get this idea that people love the darkness more than the light.
Right,
and in Easter, we're moving into the light, and Jesus wants to make us well. Do we want to be made well?
Yeah. I really like that. There's a lot to say there, but
let's just stop on well.
Sure.
Let's stop there on well for one second. I like your response to my hunness. And so he doesn't say to him, do you want to be healed? You're a paralytic, now you can walk. He says, do you want to be made well? Which my understanding is that this is a question of shalom. Do you want to be made whole? And whole is mind, body, and spirit. So the healing, Jesus' healings are not just physical healings, they're spiritual healings.
Right.
And leading to the fullness of life, soul life, body life, how, I know these are some Greek categories here, but this is a bigger thing here than I'm just going to fix your body like you went to, the surgeon to fix your body or something like that.
Yeah. That goes along with the introduction with this pericope to the section in John where there's an Old Testament feast, or in this case, just the Sabbath. It is a feast, but we don't know which one. But we know that it's a Sabbath, and that's clearly the relevant thing here. and then Jesus drawing out its significance, or even giving it a new significance, perhaps, and that the Sabbath points to, obviously, to rest and restoration in God, and then Jesus's healing points to something else. It is a sign of perhaps like healing from spiritual paralysis or something. Just before we move along, I mean, I think, Elizabeth, your reference to Revelation made me think of something I think is worth putting on the table, is that the first part of Revelation are these letters from Jesus, sort of channeled through John to various churches.
Right.
And, the famous one, maybe the most famous one is charged with being lukewarm. Mm-hmm. And, be either hot or cold, but if you're, in the middle, I will spit you out. And, Jesus is calling them on the carpet for, being, maybe a little too apathetic. So that ties in very well, I think, to what you were saying. And to what I think is going on here.
I would like to just give that translation as "you make me want to puke."
Yeah.
It's an incredible New Testament.
Yes.
Anyways.
Yes. But so with the Sabbath here, I mean, it's super interesting. This is the beginning of controversy in John's gospel too. So one of the threads here is the beginning of controversy. It comes early in John, as it does in the other gospels. And it happens because Jesus not only heals on the Sabbath, which, the Torah, Exodus and Deuteronomy both prohibit work on the Sabbath, but this sort of work is not defined. But it is thought by Jesus's detractors that Jesus is working on the Sabbath. Furthermore, Jesus commands this man to do something that is clearly classified as work on the Sabbath, which is to pick up his mat. It doesn't matter that it's a mat. It just matters that he's picking something up. In Jeremiah 17, it says, "Do not carry any load on the Sabbath day." And later, the Mishnah, later than Jesus, but just codifying and writing earlier oral traditions that were certainly around at the time of Jesus, defines 39 categories of prohibited labor on the Sabbath day, and one includes transferring an object from one domain to another. So Jesus is kind of roping this guy into the violation of the Sabbath as well. It's also just a standard thing that Jesus seems to say to people when he heals them, including in the Synoptic Gospels. And I just love these sort of connections between language and events in John, which is of a different tradition and very often using very different language and reference points in the synoptics, and seeing where those are actually shared. And this take up your mat thing is, in Mark, we get Jesus saying to a paralytic, stand up and take your mat. And then in Acts, Peter, after the ascension, will say, in the name of Jesus, stand up and walk. But anyway, the Sabbath violation is what kicks off the controversy and the antagonism towards Jesus and John.
If it were melodrama, every time it said, "and that day was a Sabbath," you'd get the organ.
Yeah. That's a good call. A good call.
But yeah.
Love that.
Also the 38 years, I read that, actually it was Cyril of Jerusalem, again, who posited that this was a reference to the length of time Israel spent in the desert. And in Deuteronomy 2:14, it says that it names 38 years as how long they wandered. And someone rounded it up to 40 at some point.
So, yeah.
But 38 years, I think that's really interesting. Obviously, we know John doesn't throw any things in there without some symbolism.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that Jesus is beginning to drive home this idea of liberation and joining in to, the new kingdom, the new era of God and reign of God, and, to get out of your slavery and come into freedom.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what this man symbolizes. Maybe that's why Jesus picked him out. He was there 38 years, maybe the longest running invalid to not get his chance in the pool. And, I think that there's that too. And also it's by the sheep gate. I don't think that's a throwaway either.
No.
That here's this pool by the sheep gate. And there's a lot of references in John with Jesus at the sheep gate. The sheep entering, the shepherd enters through the sheep gate too. Jesus is the sacrificial lamb. So, this is the gate all the sheep come into to go become sacrificed in the temple. And, Jesus wants to bring an end to this.
Oh, that's interesting, because by my take on it, it's closest to the Lion's Gate and not the Sheep Gate. But what do I know? I'm just a visitor.
It just says it
I know it says here, but if you go to Jerusalem now, it seems like it's closer to Lion's Gate to me. But I only visit Jerusalem. I don't actually know that much. But I want to circle back to what you're talking about, Elizabeth, or building on what John was talking about, which is to say, so you had named that we have this movement of festivals through John's Gospel, through the part that we're starting now. This one is unnamed, and then we have a movement of things that happened. We have the woman at the well. We have the healing of the paralytic here, and we're going to get the healing of the man born blind, and then at the end of the Gospels we're going to get at the fire, chapter 21, there were two others, and Elizabeth, I'm now more and more convinced of what you've been sort of drop by drop saying, and maybe I'm now going to take it and agree with you that these are representative figures. They're not named as people. Maybe the 38 years is a real thing, maybe not, I don't know. But these are representative figures, and so theologically this is every person here. And so the idea is to draw us into the gospel as a participant, not as an observer. And that I think that I was studying this text this morning, and I was there pretty early at my post at this little coffee shop, and this super jack guy came in and sat right down next to me, and I said, okay, so you're a trainer, because people don't look like this unless they do this all day long. Nobody looks like you look. And we got into this conversation, and he was, and so we were talking about what's the problem with my left shoulder, and he came up and analyzed my left shoulder. And basically at the end of it, what I heard him say to me was, take up your mat and walk. In other words, there is a thing you're not doing for your shoulder that you can do. Now do it. I felt like Jesus had visited and sat next to me at 7 o'clock in the morning at LPQ. And while I was studying this text, and so we have Jesus' initiative, but then what you guys were both saying, you got to do something about it. And I'm like, oh, wow, the reason my shoulder slides, ouch, sorry, they got to cut that down. I mean, the reason my shoulder has pain is because of a thing that's in the back. I got to do something about this. Yeah. And so I do think there is something to this, every person. Yeah. We read this symbolically. We enter into the story and we're transformed. Yeah. And that's why the scriptures are alive to us, right? Yeah, because absolutely. Now when you get into it far enough into it, you start to go, dang, that's me.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, indeed. I was looking at a commentary on John that you introduced me to by John Sanford, who was, in addition to being an Episcopal priest, a Jungian analyst, and wrote a commentary on the whole of John's Gospel from his perspective, both as a priest and as a psychologist. And in this passage, he obviously this man is ripe for that sort of analysis, right? And he borrowing from one of his teachers, who was a disciple, a student of Jung himself, named Fritz Kunkel. He identifies this man as apparently Kunkel identified 4 egocentric personality types, and one is the turtle. And that this man is a turtle because he withdraws into a shell of sorts to avoid, the harsh realities of the world, and that people absolutely do this, that it's counterintuitive, but to be healthy and, capable, to be, kind of fully alive in that way, comes with incredible responsibility. Life is full of tension and demands, and it is hard to navigate life as sort of a full participant, a healthy participant in life and in the world. And that while it's not fun to be sick in whatever way, psychological, physical, or some combination of the two, it does often amount to, among other things, a sort of ticket out of the complex messiness, hardships, decisions, responsibility of living in the world as a responsible adult. And that if you're like, this is my excuse, and it kind of keeps me in this comfort zone, you can see why people cling to whatever it is that they're clinging to, and actually maybe on some level, maybe often unknown to them consciously, perpetuating their own condition. Because if you imagine that this pool can really heal you, this guy's been there for 38 years, and you just take that sort of straightforwardly and literally, if you will, for a moment. Surely an opportunity in 38 years presented himself for him to be the first guy in. You would think so. I find that to be a very interesting elucidation of this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really interesting analysis. And there's a term for it called learned helplessness.
Oh, yeah.
When people experience trauma after trauma, they can't imagine they could ever live a different way. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think Jesus has great compassion for that condition. Yes. And that here he comes to offer him, he doesn't even have to get into the pool. He's like, let's just bypass this whole system and let me help you. But the man, he was invited into it. Jesus found him. So to me, this speaks to all the people who are trapped in their cycle of illness or, seemingly impossible situation. They really can't see their way out and have not found the help they need in spite of many efforts, maybe. We all know lots of people who are sick or sick for a long time or cyclically sick with various compounding conditions, and it's a nightmare. It's so sad, and it's hard to say, oh, they're just not, seizing their opportunities, or even if that's true, if they don't have the wherewithal, they do need some outside agent, some community around them to help them. Yes. And so I think, that's one big, large function of the church is to sort of provide some kind of, at least a next step,
Yeah.
But it's tough. It's so tough for so many people.
Really interesting. Really interesting. So when I was in India, I used to have these meals that I called Dharma dinners, where my friends Chris and Jack and I would eat with the Buddhist monk, former Buddhist monk, now Shitapatra. And then sometimes I would listen to what Chris had to say after that. And so we get talking about different spiritualities here. And so in John's gospel, in particular, we get that Jesus knows. I mean, right? He knows. It's like the woman at the well. He knows all her story. He knows. He picks this guy out clearly because he knows. What does he know? And that our spirituality is that the living Lord knows each of us. That's the out of the boxes of this, and knows what each of our issues are. And so that when we go to overcome those things which we on our own energy cannot overcome, we have an outside grace that can help us. And this is what we might call the Lord's initiative, as it is done in the Bible here. And one of the things my friend Chris used to say, that who's spent a lot of time studying the Buddha, but with the Buddha, where there is no outside thing, the Buddha doesn't take up the question of God. So the Buddha takes up the question of the person and the mind. And so we as Christians, one of the differences between Chris and Jack and I and Shitapatra was that we would say we have in some sense divine help to get us out of our 38 years of lying there at the portico, and so that we can team up with the Spirit to help us move through, to grab us out, to pull us up, to pick us up, so that we're not left completely on our own initiative, that there is divine initiative too. And we join together like two knitting needles, rather than having one knitting needle that needs to do super B, super uber everything.
Yeah. But, I mean, what you're saying is very resonant with this text, because really all Jesus says is, you could stand up and take up your mat and walk.
Yeah.
Maybe he's never tried that. In 38 years, he decided he couldn't do it. And Jesus is like, see, you could actually just do it, or something like that.
The early Nike ad, just do it.
Like, in other words, the divine within, he finds it and gets up, and maybe that's the key. It's like, I don't know. Interesting.
Even though this is presented as a story in Jesus' life, I think it serves very well as a parable as well for all the things we've been discussing. So thank you for tuning in. And if you've been sitting down while listening or watching, get up.
Pick up your couch.
Right. It's good to walk. Right. If you're already walking, sorry, that doesn't apply. But glad to know you were with us. And please like, comment, and subscribe and all that good stuff. We love to hear from you, and we will see you next time. Peace be with you.